What is up, everyone? Welcome back to my channel. This is my review for the Heroes, and I have a review for the First Law trilogy, and the Heroes is kind of book 5 in this series because it's the 5th book Joe Abercrombie writes, but this isn't really connected to the original trilogy. We're following around different characters, but in the original trilogy, it is pretty essential to know who's in charge and all of that because the Heroes is a war between the Union and the North. And the leadership of both of those factions is completely different than it is at the start of the First Law trilogy. So I'd recommend reading the First Law trilogy first. And yeah, I've got a review of that trilogy, spoiler free, and I will link that in the description. So check that out if you feel so inclined. But anyway, the Heroes. Why do I want to do a review of this one and not Best Served Cold? Well, I definitely like the Heroes more than Best Served Cold. And if I had like a tier list of all 5 Joe Abercrombie books, I would put the Heroes, Before They Are Hanged, and Last Argument of Kings in kind of like the top 3. I'm not even sure what order I want those 3 in. And then Best Served Cold and The Blade itself, I'm not as keen on. I still like those books, but not as much as the other 3. And yeah, overall, I'm not like the biggest Joe Abercrombie fan online, but you know, I like him, and I'm probably going to continue on and slowly meander my way through all of his works. Also, that's partly because I love the audiobooks. They're phenomenal. But yeah, anyway, so this will be spoiler free for the Heroes, but it'll definitely have spoilers for the First Law. I'm not sure if I can avoid that in any way. The Union versus the North. Who should I start with? We'll start talking about the Union. So, Baez is in charge, obviously. Jasal is king, but, you know, Baez is in charge. And then Craw, who was someone that West worked with in the trilogy, he is in charge of the war effort, basically. Obviously, Baez is more in charge, but specifically of the military. Craw is in charge, and then his daughter Finn is also there. And we get Finn's perspective quite a bit. Her husband is a pretty high-ranking member in this war battle that they're having. And then we've got Gorst, who is the person who was in the fencing tournament in The Blade itself. Yeah, now he's kind of like a glorified bodyguard, and he's been disgraced over the years, but obviously he's still a great fighter, and yeah, we get a lot of his points of view. And there are a few other POVs from the Union, but the Finn and the Gorst are probably my 2 favorites and the 2 most influential throughout the book. So first, let's start with Finn. Finn is very ambitious. She wants her husband that is in a position of some power to be in a position of more power, and that is her main goal throughout the book. And she talks to him about trying to be promoted. She talks to her dad about him trying to be promoted, and she's in a tough spot because he has to get promoted by the Closed Council, which is a group of people who don't know too much about anything and aren't really in this book, and they seem to base their appointments on things like hierarchy. And unfortunately for Finn and her husband is not in line for that position or any higher position, really. And yeah, I just love Finn's reactions and interactions while trying to get her husband to have more power and to get herself to have more power. Even though she's not a fighter at all in this war, there's not as much fighting as you might expect in a story about a war. It's more about backroom deals and horse trading, and this general doesn't like this corporal, and like these people do things differently than these people, and like it's just infighting on both sides. And sometimes you need someone who's savvy to be good at infighting and try to get their way, and that's what Finn does. Gorst is also smarter than everyone gives him credit for. He seems very dumb on the outside, but he's skilled at combat, and he seems pretty skilled at strategy overall. But what holds him back? He is crippled by his own insecurities, and he has the very high voice, which Steve Pacey does very well when he narrates, and Gorst is just so mad, and he's someone who really wants to take his anger out, which war can be good for, unfortunately. But yeah, again, he's pretty bloodthirsty. And he also has a major crush on Finn, which is very awkward because, of course, Finn is married and he has not confessed his love. He can barely speak 2 sentences to anyone, let alone the girl he likes. So he's just kind of pathetic, to be honest. And he's pretty unlikable. But Joe Abercrombie does well with characters that are unlikable and making them kind of sympathetic and having some redeeming qualities. Actually, I just thought of a really good example to describe Gorst. It's kind of like Contrapoints' incel video. When you watch that video and you kind of like sympathize with incels more than you maybe think you would, and reading Gorst's point of views, you kind of sympathize with him more than you think you would. And yeah, it's also interesting to see the political squabblings among the captains and generals of the army through a kind of more neutral third party's eyes. But yeah, let's talk about the North, because we've only talked about the South so far. Oh, also Dogman's part of the South because, falling out, Black Dow and all that. Black Dow, leader of the North, still as infamous and much of a badass and total bastard as he has always been, but he's pretty straightforward. So, that's like kind of a good thing about him. We don't really get many, if any, of his POVs, but we get a lot of Calder, who is Bethod's second son, and Bethod is obviously dead, but he was the former king of the North. And then we've got Craw, who is the leader of a dozen, so he's like kind of high ranking, but not super high ranking in the North's army. And Craw is known for being honorable, so I'm like, okay, this guy's gonna die at some point, because this book has no room for honor or characters who have a moral compass. And I found it funny that was my immediate thought. But I enjoyed following Craw around and getting to know his clan, and Wonderful, who is the second in his dozen. She was wonderful. We didn't get to see too much of her, but what we did see I liked. Shivers is kind of Black Dow's number one thug. And Shivers we get no points of view from. And Shivers just seems like a total insane man now after Best Served Cold. And he's kind of like boring, to be honest. I mean, I don't know. He hardly says a word, and he just like makes commands, and he's like big and brooding, I guess. I don't know. But definitely way less interesting if you're a Shivers fan, I think. And the North has just as much bickering and maneuvering among the people below Black Dow as the Union does. And yeah, we see a lot of it through Croy's eyes, and Croy is pretty honorable and pretty much a straight arrow, so it's good to have that more like straight arrow perspective sometimes, more neutral. And then Calder is scheming. Obviously, he kind of has a claim to the throne of the North through his hierarchy to some extent, at least. So Black Dow's like, all right, I've got to keep this guy pretty close to me, but Calder is a trickster, so you got to watch out for him. And he kind of plays all the people under Black Dow against each other, and it's kind of funny to watch, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But Calder is basically the North version of Finn, just trying to use the war to play people against each other to get more power for themselves. So I would say this book is like half political intrigue, half war. And I'm not a huge fan of just massive battle after massive battle, but I do love the political intrigue, and that is why I really like this book. I think the scenes between characters are done very well. Abercrombie seems to have a pretty good understanding of power and, people's individual selfish motives. I feel like Abercrombie has a low opinion of humanity and what choices individuals make, and are those choices good for the people as a whole, or are they good for themselves? And I feel like Abercrombie would say people's choices are mostly good for themselves, but there's some humanitarianism, I guess. Some people are like, yeah, we should probably stop killing each other. Why are we doing this? Whatever. And why were they doing this? I think it was like a border dispute of some sort. I don't know. Whatever. It's always land, money, or power of some sort. That's what causes every war. And I think this has a pretty anti-war theme because of that, because it shows the motives of war being people in power's personal gain rather than being, some sort of humanitarian intervention or something to better, society. That's usually not what war is. I think Abercrombie recognizes that and puts it in the themes of his own books. And certainly this one. This was the most anti-war book of the series so far. And questions like, who really wins in war? I mean, those are legitimate questions. And again, that ties in with all of the political intrigue I like, and it all came together very well for me. Even though people like Finn and Calder are the problems in terms of people being selfish for their own gain and having that be what leads to war. But, it's grimdark, and I like following around the villains sometimes. So, yeah, definitely a solid book. I'd recommend. I'm going to continue reading. I'm probably more excited to read Red Country, which is the 6th book, than I was to read this book because, I was less of a fan of Best Served Cold. But I'm probably not going to get to Red Country right away, which is fine. That's another standalone. I hear it's more of a Western sort of thing, which I'm not the biggest fan of, but that should be fine. I kind of trust Abercrombie to have the same style, even if he's going across genres. Like, I feel like if Abercrombie wrote a historical fiction from 1675 and somewhere, it would have kind of a similar tone to these first law books. So yeah, I like it overall, and I recommend this series, especially if you like grimdark. And I don't think it's like too grimdark, and it's definitely not grimdark for the sake of being grimdark. I feel like we're touching on really important themes to society and some of the more gross things that humans are capable of. And we're touching on those, but also in an entertaining way. Yeah, entertaining and real. That's my thoughts of this book. So check it out. And yeah, like, comment, subscribe, and see you guys next time.